Well, Seamus Hughes is the former senior counterterrorism advisor for the U.S. Senate and serves as deputy director of George Washington University's program on extremism. He's in our Washington bureau. And Mary Ellen O'Toole is a former senior FBI profiler. She's on the phone. Seamus, I want to start with you. We've learned ISIS has actually claimed credit but not responsibility. So far, there's no jihadist material found, as we know of, on the computer of this man. What's the strategy for ISIS claiming credit even though we believe they're not responsible?
Right. So about 4:30 this morning Eastern Time, they released a statement out of Telegram. They're on an ISIS-linked account, basically calling him an ISIS soldier and saying that he was doing it in response to the coalition strikes. And this was the reason why he was part of it. They then followed up with a radio announcement. We've seen this play out previously, whether it's San Bernardino or Orlando. They announce statements. The question becomes whether it's ISIS-directed or ISIS-inspired, which are very important distinctions when you look at these type of things.
Mary Ellen, the suspect's family has said that he suffered from psychological problems. When you profile people, what do you hear when you hear something like that?
Well, it's important to really understand what the family means, and I think they use the term nervous breakdown, which is really quite an old-fashioned term, but it generally tends to mean that the person has in the past suffered from depression, which could include suicidal ideation, and which is important in a case like this. Because if he was suicidal and or homicidal, that could have played into his decision. And you also look for, and I think it's important here, certain personality traits that allowed him to act in such a cold-blooded, callous way without empathy or seemingly any guilt for the victims. And those are personality traits. So that's what I look for when somebody says that there was possibly psychological problems.
Seamus, we're seeing more and more of these lone wolf attacks. It doesn't appear the suspect had any direct links to terror groups, but what do you make of that?
And that's the most difficult part when you talk about these groups that are just lone wolves or at least inspired by the ideology. They don't pop their head up on law enforcement radar, right? They don't communicate with known or suspected terrorists. So you have to, I think we as a society have to take a step back and realize we're going to have to accept some level of unfortunately, attacks that occur because you're not going to be able to stop everything.
Do you think there's any way to stop it? Is there any way to prevent these lone wolf attacks?
I think a lot of this has to do with human intelligence. Unfortunately, France is in an unenviable position of having one of the larger cadre of foreign fighters. So there's a larger pool of people that are drawn to this ideology, and essentially law enforcement's triaging on these type of things. As best you can, when you see this type of thing, you see a leakage effect, a bystander effect, where people see something that's concerning but don't know what they're looking at. The trick is to try to figure out how to connect those loved ones, those family members, with law enforcement who can help prevent this before it goes operational.
Mary Ellen, when we look at the terror attacks that have occurred around Europe, do we see patterns in the attacker's path to radicalization?
Well, this is similar and very much to other crimes of violence where there are behavioral patterns in any violent crime, and this would be no exception. But when you look at patterns, we often see significant as well as minor differences in those patterns. And those differences can impact the crime, the motives, and the offender's behavior. And that's due to the fact that each offender, each terrorist has their own unique personality and they have their own unique biology. So what's important is to understand that there's no one pathway to radicalization. It's almost dimensional, like heart disease or diabetes. I think we have to start looking at these kinds of events as very dynamic, and where is this person on that continuum. But patterns will be very different, and I think a lot more research, behavioral research, has to be done in this area.
Seamus, it's now the third major terror attack to happen in France in about a year and a half. Why is France being targeted so heavily?
I think there's a variety of reasons, but when you look at that graphic you just put up, I think that's the most important one. 1,600 foreign fighters have left from France, one of the largest cadre of foreign fighters from a Western country. There's a pool of recruits, both in Syria and Iraq and also back in France, that are drawn to this jihadi ideology. So they're able to, they know the land, they're homegrown, born and raised there, and they're able to essentially figure out ways to attack France, which they see as an enemy. It's an us versus them narrative.
Seamus Hughes, Mary Ellen O'Toole, thank you both.
You're very welcome.